The collapse isn't coming someday in the future. It's already here, and most Americans are sleepwalking straight into it. Because right now, 61% of this country is living paycheck to paycheck. Household debt just hit $17.5 trillion, and more than half of all U.S. adults can't cover a $500 emergency without borrowing money. At the same time, the federal government is burning cash so fast that in 2024 alone, we added $1 trillion in new debt every 100 days, a pace never recorded in U.S. history. Meanwhile, grocery prices are still up 28% since 2019, auto insurance is up 33% in just 2 years, electricity bills are rising at the fastest rate since 1981, and foreclosures jumped 20% year over year. And while you're trying to breathe through that, here's the knockout blow. U.S. interest payments now cost more than Medicare, more than the entire military, and more than every social program except Social Security. That means the government is borrowing money, just to pay the interest on money it already owes. That's not stability. That's insolvency with extra steps. You're not imagining it. You're not overreacting. The system you depend on is cracking under your feet. And before this video is over, you're going to understand exactly why this collapse trigger just activated, and why almost nobody in America realizes what's really happening. Let me hit you with something nobody's talking about at your dinner table. But it should be. The U.S. Treasury market, yes, the so-called safest place for global money, is quietly breaking under its own weight. This market used to be the gold standard of financial stability. Trillions of dollars flow through it every day. But now, liquidity is drying up fast. The Bank for International Settlements just admitted that this $25 trillion market is showing signs of stress not seen since the March 2020 meltdown. You remember that? That was when everything locked down and the Fed had to inject over $1 trillion in emergency support to keep the bond market from seizing up. Now it's happening again, only worse. And this time, there's no pandemic to blame. The Treasury has been issuing debt at an insane rate, over $1.6 trillion just since June. And guess what? Demand isn't keeping up. Foreign buyers like China and Japan are dumping U.S. bonds. Pension funds and big institutions are quietly backing away. Even primary dealers, those are the banks legally required to buy U.S. debt, are waving red flags. Why? Because they're already choking on inventory. Meanwhile, the Fed isn't buying anymore. They're offloading. QT, quantitative tightening, is still in effect. So what happens when there's too much supply and not enough demand? Prices fall. Yields spike. And those spikes ripple through your mortgage rate, your car loan, your credit card interest, everything. And here's the kicker. The Treasury just announced it's considering buybacks in 2025. That means they're thinking of buying their own bonds off the market, something they haven't done since the early 2000s, to ease the liquidity strain. In plain English, that's like the government printing money to buy back its own IOUs because nobody else wants them anymore. And when that happens, the dollar weakens, inflation surges, confidence evaporates. So if you think your 401k, your bank savings, or your bond-heavy retirement portfolio is safe because it's government-backed, think again. The trigger has been pulled. The powder is dry. All it takes now is a spark. This isn't about politics. This is about the structural collapse of the very foundation America's financial system is built on. And no, they won't warn you before it's too late. You'll just wake up one day, and the yield on a 10-year Treasury note will be 8%, and your mortgage rate will jump to 12%, and the headlines will say, unexpected volatility. But you'll know better. Corporate zombies are devouring the economy, and they're fed by your debt. Most Americans don't know this, but we're living in the age of corporate zombies. And I'm not talking about a clever nickname. I'm talking about literal zombie companies. Businesses that don't earn enough money to pay the interest on their debt. That's it. They're dead on paper. But somehow, they're still walking. According to the latest data from the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis, nearly 1 in 5 publicly traded companies in the U.S. are now classified as zombies. That's about 20% of corporate America operating in a state of permanent financial decay, only staying afloat because they keep refinancing, rolling over debt, or issuing junk bonds that no sane investor should buy. But someone always does. And here's the part that's going to make your jaw drop. Over the past 2 years, American households have added more than $1.1 trillion in new consumer debt, including a record-breaking $1.13 trillion in credit card balances. Why? Because the corporate zombies need your consumption. They need you shopping, swiping, streaming, and staying distracted. You are their lifeline. Without your paycheck-to-paycheck lifestyle, without your loyalty points and buy-now-pay-later addiction, these companies implode. But the rates they borrowed at 1%, 2% during the 2020-2021 free money era, those are gone. Now they're staring down 7% plus refinancing costs in a world where cash is getting tighter by the day. And when those debt rollover windows close in 2025 and 2026, boom, mass layoffs, defaults, bankruptcies. It'll be Enron meets Lehman, multiplied by 100. The collapse trigger is here, but the fuse is long, and that's the most dangerous kind. You don't feel the heat until it's right at your doorstep. And meanwhile, what are the banks doing? Securitizing the zombie debt, packaging it up, reselling it like they did with subprime mortgages in 2007. And you better believe some of it is in your pension fund, or your municipal bond portfolio, or your IRA, because the system can't survive without the zombies. But they're feeding off the lifeblood of a consumer base that's already maxed out. And when the consumer breaks, and they will, the zombies go with them. This isn't a theory. It's already happening. Look at Rite Aid. Look at Yellow Trucking. Look at Bed Bath & Beyond. Just a preview. It's a slow-motion detonation, and you're watching it in real time. Power grid failure isn't a theory. It's a scheduled reality. Most people still think grid failure is some doomsday fantasy, a movie plot, a fringe concern. But let me hit you with a number you probably haven't heard before. According to a 2023 report by the North American Electric Reliability Corporation, NERC, 2/3 of the United States is at elevated or high risk of power outages during peak demand seasons. That's not a maybe, that's not a fringe blog post. That's the official body tasked with protecting the US grid. They're telling you flat out, the power systems we rely on are hanging by a thread. Why? It's a perfect storm. We're decommissioning baseload energy, coal and nuclear, faster than we can build renewables. We're adding hundreds of gigawatts of EVs, data centers, and electric heating to the grid, without upgrading the wires that carry the load. In 2024 alone, data centers are expected to consume more energy than the entire residential output of New York State. And yet we're still building more of them. AI, crypto mining, streaming, server farms, it all adds up. But that's not all. Equipment in many regions is more than 40 years old. The average age of a US transformer is 38 years. Replacement time, 2 to 3 years minimum, if you can even get parts, thanks to supply chain constraints from China. Now toss in cyber threats. Just this year, the Department of Homeland Security flagged over 200 serious cyber intrusion attempts into utility control systems. Some came from Russia, some from China, some from unknown origins, and it only takes one successful breach to turn the lights off for millions. Don't forget weather. Heat domes, polar vortexes, and hurricane-driven outages are all up by double digits over the past decade. Texas nearly collapsed in 2021. California is barely holding on during summer surges, and utilities are now preemptively shutting off power to avoid fires. Yes, they're turning it off on purpose. When that becomes the plan, you no longer have a plan. The collapse trigger here isn't just theoretical, it's physical, scheduled, and overdue. The grid wasn't built for this level of demand, and it's being asked to carry triple the load with half the redundancy. So when the next big heat wave hits, or a cyber attack shuts down substations in the Northeast, or a transformer shortage hits like a domino effect, you'll know. And your fridge, your air, conditioning, your water pump, everything you thought was normal life goes silent. Unless you're ready. The insurance industry just quietly collapsed in 12 states, and nobody said a word. You know what's worse than a disaster? Having one and realizing your insurance won't cover it. Because right now, without warning, millions of Americans are living in homes that are technically uninsurable, and nobody told them. In just the past year, at least 12 states have reported partial or full withdrawals of major home insurance carriers. California, Florida, Louisiana, Oregon, Colorado, these aren't fringe locations. We're talking about high population zones where disasters are hitting harder, more frequently, and with bigger price tags. And insurers? They're pulling out, not because they're evil, but because they're broke. The math doesn't work anymore. According to the American Property Casualty Insurance Association, the cost of insuring against climate-related events has surged over 400% in some regions since 2018. And it's not just fires and floods. It's hail, tornado clusters, inland hurricanes, derechos. In 2023 alone, the U.S. experienced 28 separate billion-dollar disasters, the highest in recorded history. And 2024 is already outpacing that. But here's the bombshell no one's telling you. In many cases, the insurers are still technically in your state, but they've capped coverage so high or raised deductibles so brutally that their policy is functionally useless. $20,000 wind deductible? $30,000 for fire damage before coverage kicks in? That's not insurance. That's a scam. And to fill the gap, guess who's stepping in? You are. Through taxpayer-funded state-run insurers of last resort, like Florida's Citizens Property Insurance Corp., which are growing so fast they're becoming too big to bail. But wait, what happens when one big hurricane wipes out 300,000 homes under those state-backed policies? Let me give it to you straight. You pay, through assessments, taxes, or collapsed municipal bonds. Worse yet, mortgage companies are freaking out. They're requiring force-placed insurance, which can cost 5x more than a normal premium, or they refuse to lend. And that means home values fall. Fast. Because if you can't insure it, you can't finance it. If you can't finance it, you can't sell it. This isn't just a pocketbook issue. It's a systemic cascade waiting to happen. And when it happens, millions will look around and ask, why didn't anyone warn me? Well, now you've been warned. The U.S. housing market has become a trap, and Americans are stuck inside. We've crossed a line in the U.S. housing market, and we're not going back. If you bought your house before 2021, you're probably sitting on a 3% mortgage and thinking you're safe. But you're not. You're trapped. And if you're trying to buy, you're already priced out. The collapse trigger. Hiding in the real estate sector isn't about falling home values, not yet. It's about locked-in financial paralysis that's freezing Americans in place, distorting supply, and setting us up for an explosion later. Right now, over 82% of U.S. homeowners have mortgage rates under 5%. That's according to the Mortgage Bankers Association. The current average rate? Hovering around 7.9%, which means nobody's selling unless they absolutely have to. Because moving means trading your $2,100 payment for a $3,500 one for the same house. So what's happening? Inventory is collapsing. In some metro areas, new listings are down over 50% year over year. Homeowners are hunkering down. They're renovating instead of relocating. And home prices? They're not falling. They're rising. But not because the economy is strong, because the market is frozen solid. Now here's where it gets sinister. Big institutional landlords, think Blackstone, Invitation Homes, are quietly scooping up distressed homes in cash. They're converting America into a nation of renters, and the math proves it. As of Q3 2024, the median rent in the U.S. hit $2,050 a month, the highest ever recorded. Meanwhile, wages? Up just 3.4%. That's not a recovery. That's a slow bleed. And Gen Z and millennials? They're locked out entirely. First-time homebuyer share has fallen to the lowest point since the data began in 1981. Even scarier, HELOC, home equity line of credit, borrowing is exploding, up over 37% year over year. Americans are tapping into home equity like it's an ATM to keep up with cost of living increases. But if home values drop, they're underwater overnight. This is the same pattern we saw in 2006 and 2007. Only this time, the trap is wider, deeper, and laced with adjustable rate HELOCs. If the Fed holds rates high another year, or worse, inflation spikes again and rates go higher, millions will default, not because they lost their job, but because they're drowning in housing costs. In a home they can't sell, in a market that's quietly decaying from the inside. The real cost of AI. Data centers are sucking America's power dry. This one? It should make your blood boil. While we're told AI is going to revolutionize medicine, make traffic better, write our emails, whatever, what they're not telling you is that AI is gutting America's energy supply. That's not an exaggeration. As of mid-2024, data centers now consume more electricity than the entire American transportation sector. You read that right. All the Teslas, Subarus, and Semis on US roads combined use less electricity than the buildings that power your YouTube recommendations and ChatGPT responses. And it's only getting worse. Goldman Sachs just released a report projecting that AI-related power demand in the US will triple by 2030. Triple. In fact, they estimate that data center electricity consumption will rise from 3% of US grid demand to over 10% in 5 years. That's more than entire states. By comparison, the entire state of New Jersey uses less electricity annually than US data centers will by 2026. Where does that power come from? Not from new nuclear, not from solar. It's being pulled from your city, your town, your neighborhood. That's why your electric bill just jumped 18% in a year. That's why utilities are quietly filing for rate increases with state regulators, because big tech is draining the grid and you're footing the bill. And when that strain turns into brownouts or blackouts during a heat wave, don't expect OpenAI to refund you. Don't expect Amazon Web Services to care. Their servers will stay up. Yours? Not so much, but it gets darker. Because to power all this, utilities are rushing to build natural gas peaker plants, dirty, fast-burning turbines, to supply energy during AI demand spikes. That means clean energy goals are being scrapped in real time, and nobody's reporting it. It's all happening behind NDAs, investor calls, and secret municipal deals. And when the environment pays the price, when bills spike even higher, and when your city starts rationing power during peak hours, remember, this is the price of AI, not progress, profit. The death spiral of the US dollar has already started, and nobody in Washington will say it. The fall of a currency doesn't happen overnight. It's not a switch, it's a leak. A slow, relentless drip that becomes a flood. And right now, the US dollar, the single thing propping up our entire economy, is leaking power like a busted oil pipe in the desert. Now, let me explain why this matters. The US dollar isn't just the currency in your pocket. It's the backbone of global trade. It's the reason we've been able to borrow trillions without collapsing. Until now. Because behind the headlines, something massive is happening. De-dollarization is accelerating, and the American public hasn't been told how dangerous this really is. Here's the truth they'll never say out loud. 2024 is the first year in modern history where global central banks sold more US Treasuries than they bought. China, the second largest foreign holder of US debt, dumped $117 billion in treasuries between January and August. Japan, the largest holder, is trimming its balance sheet to stabilize the yen. And Saudi Arabia? They just signed new non-dollar oil deals with China and India, countries that now settle oil trades in yuan and rupees. That's seismic. That's the beginning of the end of the petrodollar, and with it, America's ability to run trillion-dollar deficits without consequence. Meanwhile, BRICS Plus, the economic alliance of Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and now including Iran, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia, is actively creating alternatives to the SWIFT system and setting up a gold-backed trading platform. You won't see that on CNBC, but it's happening. They're sick of Washington, weaponizing the dollar, cutting off nations from the system, freezing assets, using sanctions like a sword, so they're building a new one. And once enough countries switch sides, the demand for dollars falls off a cliff. And what happens when global demand for dollars drops? While we keep printing them to fund government programs, foreign wars, and banking bailouts? Inflation. But not the kind you've seen, the kind that turns nations upside down. Because a weaker dollar means more expensive imports, more expensive oil, higher prices at Walmart, at Target, at every gas pump, every checkout line. And when people lose faith in the currency, when inflation becomes expected, not exceptional, then confidence dies. That's when hyperinflation starts, the kind that erases savings overnight, that bankrupts the middle class while politicians argue on cable news about nothing. And the worst part? You won't see this coming from a single event. It'll be slow, then all at once. And when it hits, it'll be too late to move your money or protect your purchasing power. The food supply chain is cracking, and this winter could be the breaking point. Go to your local grocery store and look around. It might look full. Shelves are stocked. Produce is bright. But look a little closer. There's a reason eggs cost $7 again in some areas. There's a reason orange juice prices hit an all-time high in October 2024, up 80% year over year. It's not just inflation, it's a fractured food supply chain, and the cracks are growing. Quietly, systematically. And it's going to hit hardest in the dead of winter. Let's start with something you didn't hear on the news. U.S. cattle herds are at their lowest levels since 1961. That's a 63-year low. Why? Massive droughts in Texas and the Midwest have decimated grazing lands. Ranchers can't afford to feed their herds, so they're selling off animals early. That boosts supply now, which means steak still hits the shelves. But by early 2025, beef will become scarce and expensive. USDA already projects a 5–7% drop in beef supply, but insiders say it could be higher. That's just one item. Add to that, citrus crops in Florida hit by back-to-back hurricanes. California almond and tomato yields cut short due to water restrictions. Rice imports slashed due to India's sudden export ban, which caused global prices to spike 40% in 2 months. And fertilizer? Prices are still 2x what they were before 2020, driven by natural gas shortages and geopolitical instability. Ukrainian grain exports are down again after multiple Black Sea disruptions. All of this flows downstream, right to your plate. But here's the real kicker. The food processors are struggling too. Tyson Foods just closed 2 more plants. ConAgra slashed capacity. Trucking costs are up 16% this year. Labor shortages are back. Diesel costs are soaring again. Every link in the chain is weaker, thinner, and stretched closer to its breaking point. And what happens when a deep freeze hits the South? Or a cyber attack hits a major distribution center? Or the Mississippi River drops too low again for barge traffic? You won't get a warning. You'll just go to the store and see Limit 1 signs again. And the price of everything, milk, meat, sugar, flour, will jump overnight. This winter, the illusion of food abundance will vanish. The average American household is already spending 11.3% of income on food, the highest since 1989. One more shock and that number could jump to 15%. That's how collapse creeps in, not from empty shelves, but from shelves full of food you can't afford. And that's already happening. The middle class is now America's largest debtor class, and no one can bail them out. This is the one that should scare you the most, because it's not just about policy or politics or corporations. It's about you, your neighbors, your family. The collapse isn't coming from Wall Street. It's coming from Main Street. And here's the blunt truth. The American middle class is now the most over-leveraged group in the entire economy, and there's no one left to rescue them. Let's break this down. Total household debt in the U.S. just hit $17.5 trillion, a new all-time high. But here's what's different. It's not just credit cards anymore. It's auto loans at 9%, student loans back in repayment with no relief, and buy now, pay later schemes that don't even show up in credit reports. Americans are financing groceries, gas, diapers, all on 6-week payment plans. Klarna, Affirm, Afterpay. This is consumer debt dressed up as convenience. But when you can't pay, the debt doesn't vanish, it explodes. According to the New York Fed, delinquency rates on credit cards are now higher than they were in 2008. Yes, higher than the financial crisis. And it's worse among people aged 30–49. The middle-income earners, the so-called backbone of America, they're breaking. Because they've been squeezed from every side. Housing, food, gas, childcare, and they kept up the illusion of normal with debt. But now, the payments are catching up. Auto repossessions are surging, up 26% year over year. Home foreclosures jumped 34% in Q3 2024. Medical bankruptcies are returning. And here's the silent killer: insurance deductibles. The average American family now faces $8,439 in out-of-pocket costs before insurance even starts covering serious medical issues. And 60% of Americans don't have $1,000 in savings. That's a death sentence disguised as a benefit plan. There is no room left, no savings buffer, no equity cushion. The next layoff, the next car breakdown, the next emergency room visit, it's over. And unlike 2008, there is no housing boom to borrow against. Unlike 2020, there is no stimulus check coming. Unlike Wall Street, there's no central bank bailout for families. It's just you and your credit score. And when that drops, so does everything. This is what collapse looks like. Not fire and riots. At least not at first. It looks like stress, quiet panic, people skipping meals, skipping birthdays, working weekends, selling furniture on Craigslist to pay a heating bill. That's where we are. That's where we've arrived, and no one's coming to stop it. The trigger has been pulled, and it's time to say what no one wants to admit. We are already in the collapse, not heading toward it, not preparing for it. We are in it. The trigger has been pulled, and it didn't come from one explosion, one market crash, or one politician's speech. It came from 1,000 silent, invisible fractures happening all at once. The system is breaking down in slow motion, and the American people have been gaslit into believing this is normal, that it's temporary, that it's just adjusting. But the numbers say otherwise. And once you connect the dots, there's no unseeing it. Let's get real. This isn't a downturn. It's a systemic unraveling. In 2024, the United States officially passed $34 trillion in national debt. That's $101,000 for every man, woman, and child in the country. The interest on that debt is now larger than the U.S. defense budget, $1.1 trillion per year just to pay the interest. And where does that money go? To bondholders, to foreign creditors, to central banks, not to roads, not to schools, not to you. And here's the kicker. By 2027, interest payments alone will exceed all Social Security spending. That's the beginning of the end. Because once entitlements get squeezed, America tears itself apart from the inside. At the same time, the Federal Reserve has painted itself into a corner. Inflation hasn't been tamed, it's just mutated. The CPI says 3.3%, but look around. Rent's up 9% in real terms. Car insurance up 23%. Groceries? Everyone feels it. And the Fed can't cut rates because if they do, inflation spikes again. But if they hold steady, the debt machine collapses under its own weight. The banks know this. That's why they're hoarding cash. That's why 25 primary dealers held a private emergency meeting with the New York Fed in October. An unreported session leaked days later. Because they're panicking. Liquidity is drying up. Repo markets are flashing red. And the mechanisms that keep the system oiled, they're seizing. Now, layer in this. Trust is dead. Americans don't trust the banks, the media, the government, each other. And when trust dies in a fiat system built on debt, the whole house of cards shakes. Add in a fractured supply chain, a grid on the verge of rolling blackouts, a middle class with no savings, and the looming realization that artificial intelligence is about to eliminate millions of jobs without any social safety net to catch them. You can feel it now, can't you? That eerie tension, like something's wrong, but no one can quite say it. People are acting normal, but they're lying to themselves. They're smiling while cutting back, while skipping doctor appointments, while choosing between gas and groceries. That's not normal. That's economic trauma disguised as resilience. So what does this mean to you? It means you are the backup plan. No one is coming to save you. No one is going to flip a switch and make this better. Every prep you make, every dollar you protect, every food item you stock, it all counts now. Because from here on out, the margin for error is gone. The system will limp along, then stagger, then finally break, and when it does, those who've waited too long will panic. But not you. Because you saw the collapse trigger activate before it was trendy, before the lights flickered, before the headlines caught up. This is the part of the story where you decide if you're a spectator or a survivor. So what now? You prep, you protect, you prepare. Not because you're afraid, but because you're awake.